The following program contains discussion of EN server story content, which will contain some spoilers. Viewer discretion is advised. With 2024 coming to a close, I figured this was the perfect time to do some reflection, and what better way to do that than to rank this year's Twisted Wonderland events to see which, in my opinion, was truly the best. We'll only be looking at story-based events since birthday bashes are extremely subjective, and some other events like the manga release have no content, just rewards. We'll also be including Encore since it'll make the ranking a bit more competitive and gives me an excuse to yap about one of my personal favorites. And while this will be subjective, I do have a few criteria to help me make my decisions. I'll be rating the overall story, quality of the character interactions, and my personal enjoyment. Each of these factors will receive a score from 1 to 10, and the cumulative score will decide where the event itself ranks. So sit back, relax, and get ready for a stroll down memory lane. Coming in 8th place with 15 cumulative points is Sam's New Year Sale 2024. In Universe, this sale is a staple of NRC life that draws in flocks of students with the promise of fantastical mystery bags and other delights. For us, this means we get a peek at our favorite characters' material desires, or at least that was what happened in 2023. For 2024, the event's story was centered around the challenge game that mystery bag purchasers could participate in, and how the specially chosen part-time staff were kept on their toes to make sure that no one won. Each day, we get a new group of students coming to the store to try their luck with the mystery bags, and then those characters challenge the staff to a duel for the precious golden ticket, which would get any one item from the store for them entirely for free. And when I say that, I mean that. Any item in the store they would get for free if they happen to beat our part-time staff members in this challenge, which is a fantastical prize for the low price of 50 thaw marks. In the game, this was Hanetsuki, and almost all the character interactions were based around this game as well as the staff characters hustling. The premise of the event is rather simple, and so too is the story. But this isn't a bad thing at all. It's almost like a palate cleanser since these come so soon after the Halloween events, which are always massive and involved. That said though, the brevity of this event does mean we don't get much screen time with anyone outside of the store staff, since the event has to cover every character in the game. This means that the character interactions during the event are limited, and with the inclusion of the game, they felt a little hollow to me. We don't get to hear what anyone would want with the golden ticket if they earned it, we don't get to hear what they wanted from the mystery bags, and I kind of missed that aspect from the previous year. I suppose that since we already heard this in 2023, there's no real reason to hear it again. But on the flip side, we also then get to spend a lot more time with the staff characters. Even still, I don't really remember any of these interactions off the top of my head. In fact, I only really remember stuff from the 2023 New Year's sale. Sure, I remember Sebek's vignette story, but that's not technically part of the event's base story. It's a supplemental. Even though it's fun to see everyone come to the store and we get to see how the chosen staff characters interact with those folks, I just didn't really enjoy the story that much and hardly remember any of it. All of that said, I do think that when you're playing through the event, it is very fun. Seeing the hijinks unfold is extremely fun, and since the parts are so short, it's a relatively stress-free event. Sure, you can take on some of the extra battles if you wanted to, but the story isn't gatekept by difficult challenges or a ton of little milestones. It kind of feels like another little advent calendar to me. Another little surprise each day that's still really fun even if I don't remember it all that well. Plus, the rewards are still decent enough to add a bit of satisfaction there. It was short, simple, and a sweet experience that I'm looking forward to yet again this year. At the end of the day, though, this event is just mid to me. It doesn't stand out at all, and it's pretty forgettable overall, so it's coming in last. Next up, in number 7 with 17 cumulative points, is the Soon Sitter events as a collective. We got both Part 2 and Part 3 this year, with Part 3 being a wonderful holiday surprise. These events are basically glorified vignette stories that include the squishy Zoom versions of the highlighted characters. So from a story perspective, these events go pretty hard. We get 2 story chapters per character, and these stories usually exaggerate the characteristics of each of the boys. It's so much fun to see how much chaos the Zooms cause, and how each character reacts to having to deal with another version of themselves. Sebek having a crisis because his Zoom is constantly too close to Malleus, Jade's Zoom turning the tables on him and getting Jade in trouble with a scheme, Kalim's Zoom dancing across the entire campus, and Malleus' Zoom vibrating with anger at being left out of the Zoom stack, are all wonderfully entertaining moments. The character interactions focus on the Zooms, so there is limited room for a supporting cast, but we still get to see a lot of the highlighted characters and learn quite a bit about them. There are also subtle hints to previous vignettes from time to time, allowing folks to obtain information that they may not have had access to if they didn't have those cards. Like in Azul's Zoom story, where his Zoom also knows how to rig dice rolls, which is something non-Zoom Azul learns to do in one of his other vignettes. The story and the interaction are great, so why is the whole of Sunderland ranked so low? The problem with these events is the grueling process you need to go through to unlock these story pieces. While the event itself is long, these stories are super short, and there are a bunch of roadblocks placed before the story that usually require some sort of time investment. A lot of these roadblocks are lesson-based, and while the highlighted characters do get extra experience, you have to sit through these lesson loops whether you like it or not. All of this just to unlock a small story fragment which may or may not be for a character you actually are invested in. This is an aspect that annoyed me even before I started making content, but it became even more apparent just how much of this event is roadblocks during the recent livestream. If you're not speedrunning this event, you absolutely have enough time to complete it, and can do so in reasonable chunks, but that's never been my personal strategy, which means I usually get burnt out during these. In my opinion, the story isn't balanced very well with the progression elements, and even though you don't have to clear both conditions of each roadblock to get the story, you do have to come back and complete them if you want to get all of the shop rewards your heart desires. The first half of Sunderland 3 contained 11 story pieces with the prologue included, but to get those you had to clear 33 roadblocks, and if you wanted all of the coins, you needed to clear an additional 33 to get the full rewards. The battle ones aren't too bad since you usually clear both missions in one go, but the lesson ones just require a time investment, and that can be really annoying. To be fair, if you are going at a slower pace, then these are probably not that bad, but to me, with the pace that I set, they are ridiculous and annoying. So my enjoyability of these events is very low, which is what tanked the score for this event. Coming in hot at number 6 with 20 points is a very chilly event, the Harvest and Sledathon, which is Apple's hometown event. It was so nice to see Apple in his element and learn more about his hometown alongside the most eclectic group of characters we've had so far. Everyone's reason for being here is so different, and yet when it comes down to it, everyone is on board and motivated to race. This leads to a bunch of fun character interactions, as well as some rare camaraderie between the NRC boys. Although this is largely due to RSA being involved, since we can't ever get along unless we have a common enemy. Plus, this event gave us Marja, the most wholesomely competitive grandma out there, to our knowledge at least. Seeing Marja flip from sweet wholesome granny to crazy competitive racing devotee was not only super fun, but an excellent example of show don't tell. We get to see Marja's frustration firsthand and can connect it to Apple ourselves. And throughout the event, we can draw all sorts of lines between the two, which I think fleshes out both characters quite well. Also, because our group is so eclectic, we get to see each individual's talent shine throughout the duration of the event. Sebek's strong convictions are no match for Marja, and we get to see him be more sensible than normal, though it is still in a way that's very true to himself. We get to see a much softer side of him with his squishy, and his sharp senses come in handy towards the end of the event. Jade, for his part, is sadistic as always, but he also geeks out quite a bit over the mountain itself and the bounty it offers, which gives us a rare glimpse at that side of him, at least outside of some of his vignettes. He seeks out a special soup that's full of local mushrooms, offers good advice here and there mountaineering-wise, and overall he relishes in the chaos that the other characters create. Idia goes off about his anime obsession and has a much better time than I think he was expecting. I can completely understand this, as there's lots of folks that go to movie and other show sets and geek out about being in the same locations, and I think that helped Idia enjoy and interact with folks more than he otherwise would have. The tablet doesn't really come out that much at all, if at all. I can't quite remember, but I think that's saying something given his normal MO. And of course, Apple is living his best life the whole time, except at the very end, but overall it was a fantastic time for him too. The four of them interacting was also very interesting to see, and I love this little tale. Not as much as some of the other stories, but it's certainly a good one, and it feels like a very organic journey. All of the actions that are taken end up resulting in something and create good momentum throughout the story. As far as the actual event progression goes, it's pretty good. Since it's a twist tune event, there aren't any real checkpoints to clear, and the tunes themselves are pretty fun. Watching the boys sled is very cute indeed, and while the story is time-gated by the release schedule, it doesn't feel like it's dragging or rushed. There's enough time to do the story with each chunk, and the story itself keeps momentum throughout. Even during the encore, I still enjoyed the story. However, I think it's really the character pieces that make this event shine. Since the twist tunes don't come until the later parts and some of the Cocoa Market scenes drag a little bit, I knock some points off the enjoyability scale. But I did enjoy it way more than our previous two events. Squeaking into number 5 with 22 points is White Rabbit Fest, Deuce's hometown event. This event has a lot of the same qualities as the Harvest and Sledathon, just with different characters, and the overall tone of the story is a little different. Instead of defeating the RSA kiddos for bragging rights, we're defending Dia and the other White Rabbit delivery folks from one of the town's delinquent gangs. Sorry, Marja and Idia, Dia is best girl. She's a 10 out of 10 and immediately elevates this event. And she also gives us a lot of show not tell story moments with her interactions with Deuce. It's clear that they still don't see eye to eye completely, but their interactions are so sweet anyways, and we get a lot of informational teasing from Dia on Deuce. I'd love to see his baby photos of him as a cute fluffy little rabbit in a little costume. I think that would be darling. And poor Deuce would likely die of embarrassment. Outside of the family interactions, we get quite a few wholesome folks. Silver is here and he only falls asleep once in my memory, which is surprising, but also leads to a super cute moment where previous setups within the story pay off. Ortho is here too, and he creates his very own gear, which is not only super cute, but very functional for the race. We get to see him continuing to learn about humans and acting as he fakes out Dia by pretending to be offended when she calls him a robot, which isn't the best acting, but he is trying, and that counts for something. Apple is also here, and he gives us some very hilarious anecdotes of rumors he heard about Deuce, which lead to some great expressions from Deuce. However, Apple's moxie also comes in handy not only during the race, but during some of the other confrontations as well. There is a decent amount of downtime in town, as well as a riveting conflict, all leading to the main event of the event, the Rabbit Run. The resolution is super satisfying and feels, again, very natural in the progression of events. It feels like the characters were actively involved in the end result, same as Harveston, but we also get to see more embarrassing moments from Deuce as he gets called out for being a delinquent. He and Dia have to hastily cover it up so the other boys don't get too suspicious, which is very wholesome, but also hilarious. And on the whole, the story and interactions make up the bulk of the enjoyment here. The event progresses very similarly to Harveston, with similar hard-baked time gating, and the twist tunes are kept for the later chapters, but nothing feels particularly rushed. I did not pay much attention to the event schedule for this one, so I had to rush quite a few chapters, which made my experience absolutely terrible. Do not try to complete all of the stamp missions outside of the login ones on the day that the stamp missions expire. Don't do that. Don't go into the new year doing this. I guarantee you, doing this will ruin your event experience. Do not be me. Looking back on the event itself, though, I really liked it, but I do remember being exhausted from having to speedrun the story bits and stressing out about the rewards at the 9th hour, which, for my subjective consideration, knocked off a few points. But I did like this one better than Harveston, so I'm glad my self-imposed rules worked out to rank this event above that one. In number 4, with 24 points, we have an event that would have been at the top of this list if I didn't have one gigantic gripe, and it's Playful-Land's Miraculous Marionettes. The cast picked for this event is stellar. Ernesto is more than conventionally attractive from an aesthetic perspective. We love a nonverbal king, and the overall vibe of Playful-Land is just so fun. I love the circusy aesthetic. I love showmanship, even if it's mainly schmoozery, as dealmakers are my favorite types of characters. I love that it's just colorful. The background art is stellar, especially the nighttime scenes, and the character interactions are absolute gold. The goading, the banter, the biting props because Grimm thought they were real fish, Jade stacking the pool teams in his favor, the Ferris wheel chatting, the roller coaster riding, and the carousel scene. This single scene would have carried the entire event to the top if it was isolated. I cannot get it out of my head. It is going to be there forever. I have no choice in the matter. There are just so many fantastic character moments for everyone in this event, even for Trey, who I don't normally care for, and Ernesto is no exception. Every scene that he is in is enhanced, not just because I think he's cute, but because he's a constant reminder that there is an underlying threat here. There is a catch to this place, and there is some odd behavior that happens when Ernesto and Gino are around. It's very easy to make assumptions about Ernesto because he gets written off by the rest of the boys as harmless, and it's very tempting for us to do the same. The more time that passes, the less suspicious he becomes as we get desensitized to him. And with this absolutely adorable little guy by his side, how could you possibly suspect that the two of these people are turning other people into puppets? Yet every time Ernesto twirls his staff, every time he suggests something fun, every time he says something that could be suspicious but isn't outright a threat, it just puts you on edge. Or at least that's how I felt. This event also had the most terrifying consequences and the highest stakes that we've seen so far, at least in the sense that I could feel them and they scared me. Technically, being changed into puppets is a very isolated consequence, a very isolated stake, because it is just the people that are involved. And technically, you could say that there are going to be more people that will have that stake happen to them. But they cannot rid the world of people, otherwise there won't be anyone to buy the puppets. So it's still slightly isolated compared to some of the other events. However, there is a sense of dread that just permeates every single moment of this story. There is an anticipation of the terror that continues even when the threat is known, and as each of our boys gets taken down, there is just this little shred of hope that becomes more and more desperate. A tiny little light which you cling to as you get to the final act. One that you believe in your heart of hearts will come true. A turn of events that will resolve the story for our boys in favor. Only for that hope to get snuffed out entirely, and it is the most frustrating thing I have ever felt in any story this game has crafted. There is all this build-up to the final battle. There's plotting, there's picking off the main cast, there's the brilliant use of the singular brain cell Ace possesses, and some classic schmoozery from Ernesto, which all comes together fantastically, yet it ends with such a letdown. I really thought that all of the talk of schools and the experience it offers were going to play a much bigger role in forming Ernesto's very small, but still somewhat existent conscience. Technically, it is our boys' actions and their thoughts that do eventually turn the tide, as I think they did spurn Gino on a little bit, and they replay in Ernesto's head during the critical last few moments before everyone is finalized into a puppet. But the narrative doesn't really give us enough of the influence, I think, to really make this final decision-making process matter and connect to everything that came before it. Plus, at this point, all of the tension we had been building up is completely gone. There is nothing but resignation for our boys, and while as players we know they're still going to get out of it, that process now feels very disconnected from everything that we've experienced so far. Truly feels like all of our effort was in vain, and the focus gets shifted onto the money aspect a little bit, and Ernesto's personal values, which is contradictory to his actions that he takes, and he even mentions this when he goes to pick up the phone. It's just a little disconnected. Sure, Gino knocked some sense into him, quite literally, and that part was done as a result of our earlier words in a way, but I just wish they gave us a few more crumbs to connect these dots, or to have the phone call cut into the talks between Ernesto and Kaleem. To have Ernesto make that choice while Kaleem is still on the table, I think would have kept the tension until the very end and could have given us that last bit of Ernesto's motivation to make his underlying motivations more compelling. Instead, we get Ernesto contradicting himself with his grudge, feeling devalued, and then getting a little bit of a nudge from Gino to move on, which, if I might add, is something that they could have absolutely done without releasing the boys from their puppet forms. They could have decided to move on and just left everyone as they were. There was no real reason for them to unpuppet us, and we also never get to know if any of the other people on the boat get unpuppeted as well, which I think is extremely important info that is missing. The ending doesn't need to be dramatically reworked, in my opinion, it just needs to keep its spice until Ernesto's turning point. If it did that, I think this event would have skyrocketed to the top of my list. Imagine with me for a moment that Ernesto is gloating on stage, about to rip Kaleem's ticket in half, when the phone call startles him. Kaleem, being the cutie patootie he is, would probably encourage him to take the call while he waits patiently for Ernesto to inevitably turn him into a puppet. Ernesto gets thrown off enough by this genuine action because at this point he knows that Kaleem is just a sunshine boy, that he actually takes the phone call. And then after that point, Ernesto has to decide with all of the information on the table whether he's going to take Kaleem off the board or release everyone and cause chaos. Gino can still influence his decision here, and I think having that moment be the deciding factor, with the threat still looming over Kaleem's head, would have been much more compelling. Kaleem is also the only member of the main cast that would actually let Ernesto and Gino talk this out while waiting like the good kiddo he is. And in my mind, this would have been just a much more satisfying resolution, even though it's not directly tied to our influence necessarily. It still keeps that tension up until the moment of the decision, which I guess is kind of my larger issue with that moment. Ernesto could also, at that point, schmooze his way into getting a check cut from the Asims, since it would still be on the table because he hadn't turned Kaleem into a puppet yet, which would then make his running away at the very end even more tragic and hilarious because he'd be running away from the money. Also, knowing about the other people that were on the island that also got turned into puppets would be amazing. Like, you could just throw in a random line or two to address that. Or when they get back to the island, when they get back to Sage's Island, you can just have like someone call out and be like, oh my god, I'm so happy I'm home. And then turn to the boys. So that way we know what happened to those people. Anyways, this event would have been perfect to me if its final resolution made a little bit more sense and had a little bit more tension. Because right now it just feels like a total Deus Ex Machina moment, and that doesn't really work for me. However, I cannot really forgive it because it makes no sense to me, and because I feel like a much more fulfilling resolution was right there. They laid all of the tracks for the train only to derail it at the very last moment, and I don't understand why this happened. Perhaps my take is not the most critical. I just can't get over it from my perspective. And even the event modules were fine. I was very worried about it being split into groups for the whole event, but I'm glad that that piece was limited to just the one part. I don't have any qualms about the lessons because each non-split group part had a very specific goal, and one that you could do in a day or two if you really wanted to, which gave you more flexibility for actually reading the story at your own pace. Again, everything was perfect except the ending. I'm just disappointed. And again, perhaps my critical reading skills are not sharp enough to understand the brilliance of the ending, but since this is my list and my opinions, I'm ranking Playful Land here. Now, taking home the bronze medal with 26 total points is Cloud Calling on the Savannah, one of my favorite hometown events so far, which was totally not at all influenced by one of my favorite characters in The Lion King getting a twisted version. No, not at all. On a serious note, this event was fantastic, and it gave Leona some much needed nuance. Up until this event, I really had considered him lukewarm at best, and I was still kind of grappling with Leona's motivations for book 2 and his lack of care, or at least my perceived lack of care on his part. But somehow this event showcased the depth of his character in a way that I wasn't really expecting, but it made a lot of sense to me and it overturned my opinion of him completely. I think the main difference between this event and the other two that we got this year for the hometown perspective is that the bead brawl takes up much more of a back seat to the character interactions and motivations here. Plus Neji, or Kafaji as I will be calling him because Neji is too close to Nej now that I know how that's supposed to be pronounced, and it confuses me. Anyway, Kafaji is very involved in the event and shows up a number of times. It's because of him that we get more background for Leona from an outside perspective, which shows the gap between Leona's perception of reality and what's really going on. Kafaji seems to truly care about Leona, however, because it's through the lens of being a Chamberlain, it can sometimes come off as more duty than genuine care, and from Leona's seat, this duty isn't something he should be trusted with, given that in the past he's dealt with so many people putting him down in order to raise his brother up. The feelings between the two get lost in translation, but from an outside perspective, these interactions add quite a bit of depth that I, at least, felt added to Leona's characterization a ton. It also is super fun to see how Vil, Lilia, and Kaleem enjoy the Savannah as well. The pop music duo do pop music things, and Lilia's carefree love of life coupled with Kaleem's create the most beautiful chaos. Vil, of course, reins in folks from time to time and keeps everyone on task, including Leona, but he also gets his fair share of moments in the spotlight. It's also very fun to see how each of their personalities comes through in their fighting, or lack of fighting style. Sure, Leona gives them all the instructions and plans out each and every step of the competition, but you can't account for chaos and slip-ups. Having Kaleem win his match because of the previous setup with the bus driver was so cathartic, and seeing Lilia get taken out because he used magic to save someone was extremely on brand for him. The tension during the final battle was also very thrilling and not undercut like a certain other event, and it makes the final escape part even more fun. Also, having Cheka pop up every now and again was fantastic. I love this little guy, and seeing Kafaji work out Leona's plans in real time while also having his hands tied as Chamberlain was extremely fun. This event was such a good time overall. The characters and their interactions were great, the story was simple but still impactful, and actually getting to finally see Leona through his actions and interactions in this event really enhanced my experience a ton. There were so many moments that just made things click, and I found the scene where we get to hear that Leona was out there consulting with the stars particularly compelling. I hope that we'll get an encore of this one sometime soon because I'd love to revisit it again. However, my love was not enough to conquer the top two contenders, who were very closely tied. In second place, with the silver medal and 28 total points, we have Glorious Masquerade. This event is such a banger that even during its encore, I still had a fantastic time. I find Rollo to be such a compelling and terrifying villain that every time he's on screen, my skin is crawling with anticipation of his no-good rotten deeds. This event is also another rare instance of our boys working together to defeat a common foe. However, this time the stakes are much higher than they were against RSA. Sure, Playful Land also had the high stakes as well, but again, those were kind of isolated in a way since it's just the boys, and the park owner is probably not going to turn the entire world into puppets because that undermines his profit. But Rollo is going to rid the world of magic even if he has to burn down all of Floor City and beyond. In fact, he believes it's his solemn duty to do so and has no plans to retire either, which make this whole ordeal a looming threat even after our victory. There is no telling when or if Rollo might try this whole thing all over again, or something worse. And when he does, will there be anyone to stop him? Rather terrifying to consider, no? That said, the threat is limited to those with magic, so to us as players, or at least to me, it's a bit more abstract than being puppified. However, I don't think its impact is lessened by that in the story. You still feel the desperation of the boys as they slowly get split apart. You can feel their determination as they carefully weigh the odds and determine who gets left behind. And even in the final act, there is still some fear there as well. Azul plotted like always, Malleus is ridiculously strong, Edia's got all of the words to smack Rollo down with, but Rollo's determination and complete disregard for himself and his magic makes him extremely terrifying, and even in that moment, Malleus gets scared, albeit briefly. Rollo will burn himself down with the city with no hesitation to ensure his plan succeeds, which allows the climax to really feel like a climax, with its resolution coming naturally in a very satisfying way. Also, Rollo as a concept is done very well, and he feels like a very real person since his motivations are somewhat understandable. Rollo's internal struggle and shifting his guilt onto external forces instead of healing and coming to terms with the reality of his trauma is a very sympathetic position for a villain to have, and I think that's part of the reason why he and this story is so appealing. Having a slightly sympathetic villain like this adds a little bit of nuance to the story, since his actions may be flawed, but his motivations are understandable, and it can cause you to question whether or not the side you're on is in the right. Granted, Rollo is much farther over the edge than anyone else, which makes the answer to who is right and who is wrong still pretty clear, but he's not as cut and dry as Frollo is, so there is a little bit of doubt surrounding whether or not he can change. It's only at the very end of the story that we get this answer, but his reluctance to change, I think, fits very well with his character and is way more satisfying in the end than if he had just decided to give up. But that's not all the story has going for it either, because it has similarly fantastic character moments. I still think about Azul's stomach growling with such perfect comedic timing, or the various performers the boys react to during the festival. Grim getting upset that he's gotta sit on our lap during the performance is super cute too, and Sebek fighting over that seat with him to be close to Malleus is so on brand yet still so fun. Seeing Edia geek out about the little wooden figures, having Riddle's team be rather dry overall is very on brand, and having Ruggy try to steal the cash register hats is also just hilarious. Even when the going gets tough, we still get great moments where some of the other characters shine. We get Eppel's moxie and spirit during his and Riddle's flight scene, and his farmer knowledge pays off in the overall strategy. We get Deuce and Rook becoming an unlikely but very fun pair, and we get to see Ruggy and Jamil being Ruggy and Jamil. We also get to see Silver being a very considerate little bean, and we get to see a lot more of Train, which is super nice throughout. But Train's moral compass eventually guiding the boys was a very peak moment. To top it all off, Malleus gets to meet a talking gargoyle too. Can there be a better event? I think so, but it's not by very much. Regardless, from a mechanics perspective, this event plays very similar to Playful Land, with various lesson milestones and some team modules, but the pacing is done very well, and it's done in a way that shoots the suspense from 0 to 100, which I think works very well for the overall experience. We know Rollo is going to do something, but he's not so glaringly suspicious as to create a looming threat. But once the threat is shown, it's all hands on deck, we gotta ring that bell, and the momentum is reflected in the progression blocks very well, at least from what I can remember. This event just feels so perfect from a narrative perspective that I had a lot of trouble figuring out where to place it. Honestly, in my heart of hearts, this event is tied for first, but I also didn't want y'all to have to sit through another coin toss. So I thought long and hard, and it really wasn't as enjoyable the second time around. There were a lot of parts of the story during the festival that I hadn't seen before because I picked different options, but because I knew what was going to happen and when, the story's momentum was a bit slower to me. I still enjoyed it for sure, but it couldn't match the energy that I had the first time around. So Glorious Masquerade sits nicely at number 2. That leaves the gold medal for Stitch's Tropical Turbulence, with 29 total points. Not quite a perfect score, but it's still my favorite event of the year. Lilo and Stitch is such a fun movie, and I think it was translated in a way that makes a lot of sense for the Twisted universe. But the story here really isn't all that deep. The plot is just a pretext for our beach episode. However, it's so honest about being what it is that I think it actually adds to the overall experience. We all know what we're getting ourselves into, and there is no reason for us to think too hard about the circumstances or story progression, so we can just enjoy all that happens alongside the boys. The parallel discovery of the island and of all the fun little games is just such a nice reprieve from the other events. Even though there are stakes, they don't feel that grandiose, and the pressure really isn't there, which to me makes total sense for what this event is trying to do. Part of the reason the stakes are negligible is because we have the wonderfully chaotic trio of Floyd, Lilia, and Stitch, all having a blast and living life to the fullest without regard for the consequences. They really don't need to consider this either, as there really isn't anyone else on the island besides Gantu. So there's no one around to get hurt besides us, and Gantu's robots aren't really that much of a threat given our collective power. In fact, it's way easier to have the robots come to us so we can scrap them than to make any effort to go out and collect the scrap from them ourselves. We get to kick back, relax, enjoy island life for all it's worth, and when things get serious, we deal with them. Easy peasy. It's also hilarious that everyone besides Lilia and Floyd was super ready to give Stitch over to Gantu at the beginning of the event. It's so on point, but also so wildly assumptive on their part that it gave me a good chuckle. Then, with their overwhelming persuasive powers, Lilia, Floyd, and Stitch kind of force the group into accepting Stitch, and the rest of the chaos unfolds from there. Seeing Lilia's survival knowledge coming in handy was very exciting. Having Jack get called out for being a tsundere killed me, and the group warming up to Stitch as time goes on was very heartwarming. Even Grimm's jealousy feels very well placed, and it's honestly kind of frustrating that no one recognizes this is happening, particularly the MC, given how much time they spend with the rascal. However, it is necessary plot-wise. I just think it's a little annoying. His feelings are valid given the situation, and his capture makes for a very fun climax since we have to then go and save him before he is taken off into space, never to be seen again. It's also super cute to see Azul and Floyd gloating about their knowledge of the sea, particularly with the hermit crabs. I just thought that part was fun. The surfing scene and the little dinner scene were so cute, and the boys working together to build the house is such a wholesome, fun little moment. I just love the whole vibe of this event and all the cute little character interactions we get throughout the story. It's really nice to see Riddle getting to go on a real vacation and learning how to have fun in a conventional way. I thought that this was extremely sweet, especially for him, because I have a feeling his mother would have completely stopped a trip like this from happening back in reality. Which is very sad, so I'm glad he at least got to experience it here. Although that said, no one remembered the trip after they were poofed back into reality, so did it really have an impact? I'm fine with it being wholesome even if it's not remembered. And I do think there is a part of folks that will remember this interaction. It's just tucked away in their subconscious. So hopefully one day Riddle gets to experience this again in reality. This event is colorful, fun, and just such a light-hearted time that it provides a break from all of the serious main and other event stories. Every time I recall my memories of this event, they are nothing but warm, which fills me with a lot of joy. This whole experience was so unique, and even though the story isn't overly serious, it still made me feel a whole bunch of emotions, and I really appreciated that. I think of all the events we've had this year, this one had the best character interactions and was the most fun to play. I believe this one had more modules throughout since it was a battle-focused event, but somehow these weren't annoying at all like they were in the Vargas camps, which weren't events we had this year, but are events with very similar item collection setups. to me, these felt like we were collecting materials with the boys in their downtime on the island, and it felt more like we were actually working towards the goal of creating the house or getting Stitch back home. However, in the Vargas camp, since the goals are largely already completed by the time you need to grind the materials fully, the grinding just feels like grinding instead of an interactive journey. When I got coconuts in Stitch, I felt like I was actually contributing to the food stock, which in a way is a very ridiculously silly thought to have for a video game. However, it did enhance my experience overall. The progression milestones here felt way more rewarding than in some of the other events, and I fell for everything hook, line, and sinker. It also helps a bunch that Stitch is such a cutie and every scene that he's in feels like a little gift. Also, snagging Floyd's card means I get to see Stitch all of the time, which is another thing I think sets this event apart. I know I haven't been considering the outfit cards because they are so subjective, and even though this ranking is entirely my opinion, I just feel like that would be getting in the way from the core of what I wanted to talk about. However, in this specific case, I think it's important to note this because including Stitch in these cards was such a fantastic idea. I love that I can have my little buddy hanging out on Floyd's shoulder whenever I want, and it just is the icing on the cake of this event. The only reason I took off a point from the story is because I have one minor gripe that does not impact anything at all, but it bothers me to this day, and it's something that I probably could very easily look up and have an answer to. But what fun is that when I can just yap at y'all? Perhaps even some of you might feel the same way, I don't know. But did it bother anyone else that the reason Floyd and Azul come back to the beach so defeated after their big old "you gotta be good to mama" speech is that they can't go into their merforms because their clothes are stuck on them? Yet, clearly, they can take off at least their shirts for surfing? What are the implications of this statement? What are the rules for the magical clothes? If you can't take them off, can you at least drop your drawers for number 2? Do the clothes just not want you to be in your birthday suit? So somehow they magically know when that's your intention versus bathroom breaks? Why are the shirts fine getting ditched during the surfing, but not during mermaiding? Can you not mermaid and rip the shirt? I suppose since the shirt is magical, it wouldn't have worked this way. But also, from what we've seen of the merforms, it doesn't really seem like these guys couldn't wear a shirt while also being a fish. And I guess Floyd's fins on his back would have been a problem, but for Azul, it doesn't seem like it would have been all that bad. And none of that has anything to do with the pants either, which is the bigger question here, because like they wouldn't need to remove them for number 1, but you gotta at least get them down a little for number 2. So does this mean that the pants were fine being pulled down until the foot was lifted from the pant leg, at which point the pants said no? Because again, the shirts don't really seem like an issue, so that had to be an issue with the pants. I have so many questions about this, none of which were answered during the event, and I suppose it doesn't need an answer at all, and in the grand scheme of things, none of this matters, but I am very confused. It would have also been fun, I think, for Floyd and Azul to return not only defeated, but confused, since after swimming away, they found themselves somehow mysteriously back at the island again and again since the magic wouldn't let them leave. I don't really know. But for as much as I've yapped on this, it's not a big deal overall in the plot, and was never meant to be seriously contemplated as I am contemplating it. But I just want to know. I want to know the rules for the magic clothes. I just wanna. With that said, though, Stitch's Tropical Turbulence is by far my favorite event of the year, and perhaps my favorite event of all time. We'll have to see what 2025 brings, but for now, this is the ranking. As always, I'm curious to see if you all agree with my placements, or if you enjoyed some of these events more than others. Which ended up at the top of your list this year? Please let me know below. And if you've enjoyed this video, please also let me know that with a like or a comment or maybe even a subscribe. And if you'd like to see more content like this in the future, please also let me know below. Now, before you go, I would like to remind you that you're amazing and I hope you have a wonderful day.